do. And think about a few of these questions if you want to just answer one or two. I'll give you about 2 minutes to think about. It's kind of an exercise that I just wanted everyone to take a minute to think about. Can this session really do for me today? Are there some problems that I'm running into in my classroom or in a training exercise or in my respective department that I think we could be doing better? And use this to potentially give you some ideas to kind of jump off and then implement later on. So you can think about maybe there's an assignment in your course that you want to do that you don't feel like is super engaging and you want to try and find ways to engage with learners that way. So I'll put up a timer for you guys. Probably gives you guys about like 30-ish seconds. All right. Okay, so today, as far as the Google apps we're going to get into is using some of the Google Slides Q&A function and seeing how you can kind of get that live interaction with your audience, your students at a conference, at a training, etc., and some ideas for implementing that tool. And then as well as Google Jockeying, which isn't a tool necessarily, it's more of a concept, but there's a way to kind of incorporate some Google apps to support that idea as well. So I got this great question from Laura asking me, how do I turn on the Q&A in Google Slides? Great question. Awesome. So you guys can see, super straightforward, which is awesome, simple, not a lot can go wrong. So you just, under present here, go to presenter view. So you can present with your Q&A and your speaker notes, and it'll give you a pop-up window. So if you do have pop-ups blocked, that might potentially be a problem to be aware of. So then it'll show you here your speaker notes. If you have any notes underneath your slides, what's coming up, you can also kind of navigate here. You can also see the timer if you want to see how long you're taking on a particular slide. And if you really want these huge. So my note to myself is keeping this general window out of the general view of everyone. So after I show you guys the audience tools, just knowing that if you're sharing your screen or if your screen's up here, people can see that. So here you can either continue recent. So I'm going to continue one that I started earlier. Oh, maybe not that one. There we go. And then you can see it'll pop up with, you have the URL here that people can send messages into that'll appear at the top of the screen, as well as your incoming questions so that you can see them over on your side of the screen here, and people can also upvote these questions, and you can, so like I showed you earlier when Laura had this question, you can then present the question so everyone else can see it and who also submitted it.
I think that would be important for students to realize is that other people can see their questions.
Yeah, right.
And they can, but that's also good because then
good and bad, yes.
It's good and bad, right?
Yeah.
So don't be silly and write silly things. But if someone has already put in a question similar to yours, the students can just upvote that so that you don't get duplicates of the same kind of question.
But you can ask questions anonymously.
You can.
Mm-hmm.
The students, put the questions in, and then you can see. So the way Katie has it is basically her slides are on one screen, and then that Q&A box is on the other screen. So you can kind of see as you're presenting with the two screens. You can follow when questions are coming in. But the students, if they're logged into this, can also see the questions while they're coming in as well.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it anonymously. Yeah, you can check like the box. Like so, I've told students in assumption before, like they do not want their name to pop up in the question. You just click the box. That way
right.
they're not embarrassed when I present it.
Yeah, I didn't want to be embarrassed, but I'm already embarrassed because I did not check this window. But I even don't know how to get to your slides. Okay, so my question is, how do I get to your slides?
So we are going to share, I believe, through the Blackboard site, so everyone will have access to the slides.
Is it Blackboard?
Not yet.
Not yet.
But I thought that they were saying you don't use Google Drive and you should see your slides. You don't. So, okay, so I didn't do anything.
You haven't missed anything.
You're good to go. Also, yeah. And if you guys want to stop me at any point, if you feel like this is content that you already know, or if you have a content-specific question, just informal, let me know, catch my attention, and we can focus on that. All right, so yeah, just as kind of an overview of, there are lots of ways you can use this as far as engagement is concerned. Just so using it to break up instruction, saying, okay, it looks like 3 or 4 people seem to have this common point of confusion. You can put up this question and have people either review, discuss, something other than just talking at or lecturing to kind of change the flow of the presentation or the learning environment. And yeah, the upvoting feature is really useful for that as well as providing feedback for points of confusion. So it can be difficult to gauge if students don't understand, if they're just kind of passively listening, as opposed to when you can see, okay, I have 4 or 5 people that are saying, I don't really understand what you just said in this past section, and you can kind of focus on that or make it maybe a topic for next time.
Katie, is it easy to see when people submit questions? Are you seeing it pop up there?
Yep, it'll show you in here. You can kind of scroll, but it'll pop up. Yeah, you can see it pretty instantaneously. So the next concept that I wanted to talk about was Google Jockeying. So to define that, so we got a link as well, you can check out the PDF, is basically designating a student or a group of students during the lecture to actively search the internet for related material. So they're actively looking for content that's related to class time. There were examples where students did this on their own laptops, and also examples where they hooked up, whoever was the Google jockey hooked up their own computer, or you could use like a Zoom call to share their screen. So they're putting up content that's relevant to others that might be supporting what is being talked about. So this does create some opportunities for dialogue. So if there are some relevant examples that a student was able to locate and then project, we could take a moment to talk about that, as well as using it to compile course resources. So if you wanted to break off into groups and say, okay, let's think about creating a wiki or like a Google Sheets Excel document that everyone can reference that is about this lecture for review, for example, as well as answering. So if you wanted to use this as a kind of like a Google jockey, if a student even was monitoring the questions that came up and wanted to highlight those, or presenting something like a problem-based learning example. So saying, okay, we're all gonna split up and try and solve these problems, and then come together and see what we all came up with individually, and putting them in something like a Google Doc. So I linked a few examples there. So the first example had one student, and of course this won't work all the time for every lecture, and it's more of kind of a supplementary, this is an option. If you're thinking of an activity or a particular lecture that you had some idea, you've done a lecture a couple times, but I can't think of any other relevant articles that might be helpful or other supplementary images. Let's see maybe what students come up with, for example. You could use it in that way. So they were putting up images that were relevant to, it was more of a discussion point in that example. So if it's a lecture that is open to discussion, or something maybe about patient care, so there's more of an opportunity for like a case study, that might be a good time to use that. And the second example was, so they were compiling resources using Google Sheets. It was a K through 12 example. There are lots of very different applications that I noticed. And they were using Google Sheets. You could also do something like a course wiki or using like Blackboard discussion boards to kind of add in relevant information there too. So you can use, like I mentioned before, different Google apps like Docs or Sheets to do this, as well as a tool like Poll Everywhere. So you can then crowdsource all that information live during a lecture to give more of that active, okay, if people are going to be on their phone or on their laptop anyway, they can then be engaging with the content as opposed to maybe looking somewhere else or drifting off. All right, so I had this great idea to do a Google Jockey here. So in light of Poll Everywhere not helping me out, so I'm going to give you guys about 3 or 4 minutes. If you want to just group into 4 people that are closest to you, that seems to work out as a general rule. And if you guys want to see if you can find some examples of ways that other higher education institutions are implementing active learning principles, whether that's an exercise, maybe an academic journal. So if you want to throw in a link, you can find ways using kind of those Google Jockey concepts in your groups and then submitting them here. I'll pull up something. Actually, go ahead and just submit them via the slides, the Google Slides link. And then we can kind of come back together and see what everybody found. Cool, does everybody get that? Generally? Brian, you look confused?
No, I have a question for you.
Yeah. What's up? So you guys can submit either way. If you've already submitted to the Google one, that's fine too.
always been right. And most of the time, we don't want to mix
They're your audience, right? Oh, so I typed in April Jenkins, American Journal of Science and Education, and I said that. But I think that it's interesting. I will say that we do that. And you had to be there. And then
It just sounds like they were a little research. That part is so yeah. The money is. Correct. Yeah, we have to look at that.
Resource. There's no way to cite the data. So,
If you can just throw it in as a link, is that what you're asking?
yeah, I guess I have to take that, right? Do you want me to? I can do it.
You can do it in the poll everywhere one. Mhm.
Yeah, how can I set that up?
Awesome. All right, so we got a good number of ideas now if we want to come back together and take a look at some of them. So in a fairly short amount of time, we were able to get a pretty good number of different ideas. So we got some cool articles. Got the jigsaw method, which I had to Google because I've never heard of that before. So different teaching techniques, as well as some cool different articles about active learning. Were there any that you guys found that you were surprised by or interested by? Yeah.
We found one called Using Hand Signs to Teach HIV Medication, where they literally had the students write the names of meds on their fingers and then have them do different like shapes. At one point they're making W's and they each had like associated things with them, so it visually helps them sort of teaches them creepy gang signs. I'm kidding. It's very like interesting, and they actually wrote on their hands and then tested if they like asked questions correctly.
Just imagine them during the exam.
Awesome. Yeah, so you can then generate a report, which we'll talk about this a little bit later, showing you exactly how you would do that. But since it wouldn't allow me to copy and paste, it did allow me to generate a report in some other tab. That I could then, I had the whole list and you can kind of copy and paste, you can put that into a spreadsheet or you can make it into a PDF. So then you all have that resource and can share it. It's something like a Google Drive if you want to post it to your Blackboard or whatever. So then you all in that class session created something that you can come back and reference, or you're like, oh, what were they talking, like the HIV medication, what is that called? I'm not sure, or what's that article? And you can kind of crowdsource that information. So I thought that was kind of a fun way to think about engagement.